So it may be cold here in Northeast PA, but it is getting hot in the boxing industry. And who better to have than Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com to join me and go over the fight. Anthony Joshua against Francis Ngannou coming up March 8th, 2024. Kevin Iole, thank you for joining me.
Appreciate you, George. Thanks for having me again.
Kevin, how did this fight come together and how did it come together so fast?
Well, I think, that when Deontay Wilder unexpectedly lost, it kind of threw a monkey wrench into the plans that Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua had. They had signed to fight Deontay Wilder. That was the fight that they were expecting next. And they looked out there and they said, there are other opponents that they could take on that were probably going to be tougher choices than Francis Ngannou, but we're going to offer less money to get them, right? It was going to, it was going to take more money to get them. And so as a result, I think they decided, hey, you know what, let's go and take Ngannou, and it'll be a fight that'll get a lot of attention because of how, I don't want to say how well, but because the fact that Ngannou did last the full 10 rounds and drop Tyson Fury. I mean, I think the fight was awful, Fury and Ngannou, let's be honest, George. But Ngannou, who expected him to be at the finish? So credit to him for standing at the finish and having a chance to win that fight. I mean, it was a close fight, no doubt. I believe Fury won it, but I don't have an argument if you think that Ngannou won. So I think that's how we got to where we are. The Deontay Wilder loss kind of set in motion that, this is the guy that made the most sense.
Now, let me ask you this. The Tyson Fury fight, let's go back to that real quick. Tyson Fury, was it the fact that you thought Tyson Fury didn't look as good, or that Ngannou had that one lightning bolt that you have sometimes, first time out, it could happen, and Tyson just didn't either take it seriously or wasn't prepared for something like this?
Yeah, to me, I mean, I don't think he took it seriously enough, right? I mean, he kept saying all the right things, hey, you guys don't think Francis is anything, but he is tough and I'm training and blah, 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 blah. And it came in around the same weight that he had come in for his previous, few fights. But you could just tell the way he carried himself in the ring. I don't think he had the sense of urgency, the sense of, hey, this is a threat, and so I better fight a certain way, and as a result, he didn't put forth his best effort. And as Ngannou, the one thing we know Ngannou can do is punch, right? There was no doubt about that. And so he was able to land a shot and put Fury down. I don't know that it was kind of the same as the knockdowns that Deontay Wilder did on Fury, right? They weren't as hard knockdowns, but hey, he knocked him off his feet, no doubt about it. It was a clean knockdown. Nobody can argue that. And, and Francis made it to the finish. So, but hey, look at the fight, like go back and think objectively of the fight. Was it a great fight? If it was a boxer and not an MMA fighter, would we be saying, oh my God, this was a crazy fight and wanting to see that guy fight again? No. But because it was an MMA fighter and all these MMA fighters had been losing to boxers, I think that's why it got kind of some attention that, maybe it's not warranted.
So now let's flip to Joshua. Initially, he did not want that fight. He had said that it was a clown act and whatever. Why the swing back the other way? Is it because of how he thought, okay, Ngannou looked as good as he's ever going to look, and he didn't even look. He looked good for an MMA fighter, but not, for a boxer, he would have been beat. So you think that's him taking the risk there, saying I can get a good payday, get this guy out of here?
Yeah, like I think if you look at it and you say, okay, he could have fought Filip Hrgovic. Does the American public, does the world think Filip Hrgovic's this big threat to Anthony Joshua? And while I think Hrgovic would have given him a hard time, I think Joshua would have won the fight. But Hrgovic is good enough to have given him a hard time, and could have beaten him, but wouldn't have generated a lot of money. Same thing with Zhilei Zhang, right? You could have put the big Chinese fighter in there with him. And I don't think Zhang is all that well known that it's going to sell a ton of pay-per-view. So you're taking a big risk for a low reward. Now you go into Francis Ngannou, and I think that, the situation kind of flips, because of the notoriety that Ngannou got from the Fury fight. People are thinking, hey, this is a risk. And that, all of a sudden, and the Fury Ngannou fight did zero in the United States on pay-per-view, just did a terrible number. But because of all the, the discussion afterwards, and a lot of people didn't see it and didn't see how bad the fight was, but they've heard about the fight.
Right.
They think now, oh, it was a good fight. And so as a result, that makes Francis more viable. So he's less of a risk than either Hrgovic or Zhang, but he's a bigger draw. So as a result, and I think that's why Joshua, was convinced by Eddie Hearn to take the fight.
And that is actually a win for boxing, because you want the casuals to get involved a little bit. And if they see how good this guy looked against Fury, it kind of brings the casual fan into it, because Ngannou's a pretty big name. If you don't, because of what he's done in the MMA scene, and now boxing, coming in there with no fights and just walking in to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. So
well, we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't know that he's, I think it'll be a different kind of fight this time.
No, I do. I agree too. I do. And I had this little bit of an argument with my brother. My brother's more of an MMA guy than I am. I just think he had the one fight that he had to have, and you get a guy who didn't take him seriously. I think that's truly what happened there. Because and I know, if you don't feel mentally sharp, or you're not even, you got to be sharp on that level. Regardless of who you fight, you got to be sharp. And if you're not taking it that seriously, you're going to end up something. You could slip. Not saying he got knocked out, but you could slip a little bit. But I still think you won the fight, and we'll take it from there. But it's good for boxing that you have a viable opponent, so to speak, for the casuals. Now, where does that leave Deontay Wilder?
Well, I mean, I think that he is going to fight on the undercard of that fight, probably against Hrgovic. So that will then potentially. So there's a lot that could happen if Wilder and Hrgovic does occur, which I expect that it will. Then we could see if Joshua and Wilder win, we're back to that fight, right? But that also, now we have to consider Fury versus Usyk, and they are going to fight on February 17th. But there's also the talk of a second fight between them. So now the question comes down to, okay, after, and we'll know this before Ngannou and Joshua fight, who won the Fury Usyk fight and what kind of fight was it? I mean, if it's a compelling fight and it was a close fight and people are talking about, they are for sure going to fight a second time. If it was a lousy fight, or it was a one-sided fight, or, however you want to go, then I think that's a different story, and, they may not have the rematch. So I think, the aftermath of Joshua and Ngannou is going to depend on the results of quite a few other fights before we can really say, hey, here's what's going to happen.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for 1 second. Let's say in a strange world, which boxing is strange, Tyson Fury beats Usyk, which I think would happen. They move on. They're fighting at the perfect time too, where they have the exact amount of time off. Mm-hmm. Joshua loses to Ngannou. Do you see Tyson Fury, Ngannou for all the belts in one shot?
That's hard to say, because I guess I'd have to see both of those fights, right? So Ngannou right now is kind of playing with house money. He didn't have a good fight against Fury, but he did knock him down, and he did, manage to survive all 10 rounds. Anybody who saw the fight is not eager to see it again. But a lot of people didn't see the fight, and they've heard that Ngannou did great and blah, 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 blah. So the question then becomes, can you convince those people to buy a rematch? I suppose it could happen, right? I tend to doubt that it would happen, but I suppose that it could. But that would be something if you're talking, Francis Ngannou is going to beat Anthony Joshua.
I don't think so, but I'm not as convinced as a lot of people have really jumped on Anthony Joshua's bandwagon in the last fight. They thought he looked great. I didn't think so.
I thought he looked so you got to, in my opinion, you got to look at where Anthony's been coming from, right? And I thought it was a solid performance, but it was a performance against a guy who did not have much power, did not have much threat against him, right? Otto Wallin is not a guy that's going to go out there and you have to worry about getting whacked with the right hand and getting dropped, right? He cut Fury on an inside punch one time, but he never hurt Fury in the fight. He doesn't really hurt anybody, right? So I think it was a good opponent for Anthony, and I thought he looked solid. But Eddie Hearn after the fight said, he's back to what he was. No, I didn't see anything of that. So I think, we still need to, see. But I think when you look at the pedigree that Anthony Joshua has compared to the pedigree that Francis Ngannou has, you have to say, hey, Anthony Joshua is the guy here. And the thing that I wrote in my story is that Joshua is going to know, based on what happened against Fury, he can't fool around because he could get in trouble. And so, he's the fact that Ngannou survived against Fury is going to make Joshua all that more alert and not have something bad happen to him. So to me, that's why I think it really, this fight sets up very well for an Anthony Joshua big win.
Okay. And a couple more before I wrap this up quick. Do you think we'll ever see Wilder Joshua?
I would say unlikely at this point, but
really?
You described a scenario earlier where I said, yes, I agree that could happen under the circumstances you gave. But, I wonder how much Deontay has left, right? I have immense respect for Deontay Wilder and immense respect for what he has accomplished. This guy is not a slick boxer. He is not, a defensive wizard, and he gets hit, but he is so powerful. And until the fight against Joe Parker, he's been a seek and destroy guy every single time out. And he's going out there throwing heavy artillery at whoever he faces, looking for knockouts. That, he has really done himself proud. But everybody can only take so many punches. And I wonder if he hasn't hit that limit. And, after the third Fury fight, if it wasn't like, he's, he doesn't have the legs anymore. He just doesn't have it to go. Everybody's entitled to a bad fight, and that maybe that was his, but when it's 40 some fights into your career and you've taken, 3 fights like he took against Fury, where the amount of punishment he took, then that makes you worry about, is Deontay the same guy that he was, prior to those fights?
And that would take me to my last question I was going to ask you is this the end of Deontay Wilder, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think if he loses the next fight, he can continue to fight if he wants, but who is really going to pay much attention to him at that point? Like if he loses the fight against Hrgovic, then he'll have lost to Fury, and he'll have beaten Helenius, lost to Parker, and lost to Hrgovic, right? At that point, it's like, is anybody going to take him seriously as a contender? And he's too big of a risk for like the elite guys to say, oh yeah, I'll take him, because if all it takes for him is one punch, right? He doesn't have to be good. He always has that saying, they have to be good for 36 minutes. I only have to be good for 2 seconds. And if he can land that knockout punch. So I think if he loses to Hrgovic, it's going to be really hard for him to rebound from that, considering his age and his recent history.
Well, Kevin, you got some things down the pipe, if you could, to let my audience know what you got coming up down the pipe there on KevinIole.com.
Well, my new site is going to launch sometime later this month. I think the website will be out first. So that will come out probably in the week of the 20th, maybe after UFC 297. I was hoping before, but it's looking like maybe after UFC 297. And then a couple of weeks after that, my new app will be out for Android and iOS. And I'm going to have a lot of stuff on KevinIole.com, boxing, MMA, bare knuckle boxing, slap fighting, a little bit of everything, focusing mostly on boxing and MMA. Not the other stuff too much, but a little bit on the other stuff.
Well, that is great to hear. Kevin, as always, thank you again for the short notice call. I just wanted to get you on, and who better to ask than Kevin Iole, KevinIole.com. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
All right, brother. I appreciate you having me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Zapata Brand Podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and listen where all podcasts are available.